Well, let's go ahead and get started. Barry and Doug is not here, he's absent, so I'm filling in for him. So I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order.
Mr. Bell. Mr. Dance.
Here.
Mr. Bergstrom.
Here.
Mr. Gentili.
Here.
Mr. Hoff.
Yes.
Ms. Goodman. Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Okay. Anyone saw any changes necessary or needed for the agenda for today? Okay, could I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved. Support.
Okay, second, moving on. Public comment, I think we're free on that.
Do you tape these sessions or not?
Yeah,
Yes, I do.
Oh, you do, okay. And then do you leave them to the paper too then, or to?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I had a meeting with the paper earlier this month, and they're gonna start doing more of that, I believe.
I'm not pushing for it, I just wanna know that if we are, you know.
Yep.
Yeah, you gotta be careful there, so you don't be picking your nose and stuff like that, because I know I told my neighbor came over one day and says, I saw you on TV there, and I said, oh.
Yeah, no, that happens. Slum, just hope you didn't say anything.
No, he said everything was fine.
It was okay.
Everything was fine, he says, you guys conduct that meeting quite well. Okay, moving on. Approval of minutes for November 18th, 2019, Monday. I presume everybody got a copy of it?
We did.
And-
So moved.
Okay. Okay,
Okay, we need to vote on
okay. Let's have a vote for the minutes.
that. So this one's just, this one's not a roll call, this is just a,
Okay, just a vote.
yeah.
Was there a
That's an
motion
all in
then?
favor.
There was,
Okay.
first,
Okay.
second.
Do I have it all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Next item up is the treasurer's report, and I presume everybody got a copy of that. If not, do we have any copies, or if we don't have copies?
Does everybody have a copy?
We do.
That's the November 19, 2019 accounts payable portion first.
Just a couple of questions there then. Barney Castle Oil Company, it's ZIP, is that because our pump was shut down or something, or what's the deal there?
I guess where are, which,
You're on the wrong one.
Oh, I'm on October.
Yeah, you need a November, you got a November?
Okay, I didn't put it on in November.
Okay.
Here
Here
you
we
go.
go.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, because I noticed Barney Castle didn't even show up on this one,
Yeah.
so we're free and easy on that one.
This, we got the,
One of Barney Castle's down at the bottom there, fuel 537.50.
Okay,
so those are just accounts payable, so those are just purchases from Barnard Castle, which is basically diesel fuel for the equipment.
so Barry, are we all through with Northern Pump Services, and everything's good to go out there now with the pumps and
No.
meters and stuff?
We have not even started that project. These
Oh,
are
okay.
all the other issues that have been coming up.
Oh, okay, okay.
What's the 4100 for Manistee Township?
That is property taxes or a
Get a
special
drain.
assessment.
Get
get us
drained.
drained special assessment.
And the airport's in that.
So even though we're normally,
It would have made more sense to me than making a strain.
It is specific.
because normally we are exempt
Exempt.
from property tax, but special assessments apply to governmental units.
Okay.
So, and this is the watershed that we're in is called the McGinnis Drain, and the repairs necessary were a special assessment on those within the area.
And is this,
So, one-time deal?
No,
10
10
years. I think
years,
it's
10-year payable.
this will be, for, what's it, 10 years, I guess? The
Right,
same
I
amount,
think so.
about
Right.
41,000.
And this is either the third or fourth
Correct,
year
I
of
think
that.
it's the fourth coming up, somewhere on there. And the de-icing cost was just to repair the equipment, get it ready for the winter?
Nope, that is the purchase of our de-icing.
Oh, okay, the material, okay.
Yes. Which we used last week Tuesday, and basically a use, if we're applying to the entire runway, uses about $2,000 worth of material. So that 7,000 is about 3 to 4 applications.
Did you have some planes come in?
With the airline, to get the airline in
Airline, yeah.
on last Tuesday.
It was icy.
Any other comments, notes, November 2019 accounts payable?
Motion to accept?
I hear a second?
Support? Yeah.
That one would need a roll call, correct? Roll call. Roll call, please.
Mr. Ha,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom,
Yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Mr. Downs.
Yes.
Next item is the November 2019 financial statement, revenue and expenses, and that should be attached to the other one.
I actually had a question on this, and since Susan's not here,
Go
I
ahead.
can't ask her, but I will follow up with her. But my question was, under the current month, under income, generally, I would expect to see, under landing fees, public charters, an amount of 20,000, because that's our contracted annual, or monthly amount for them. And I don't know why it's showing 0 for the current month.
We had that problem the previous month, didn't we? Now they got caught up for
Well,
that month and now we're.
That would be on accounts receivable, but since this should be accrual basis, you know, it should show up there even if they haven't paid. So I'm not sure why that's blank, but I will follow up.
Okay.
Because for the month, expenses over income is about $36,000. That 20,000 is a big contributing factor to that, so.
Any other questions, comments?
Well, there's nothing in there for current month, but I guess it hasn't been approved yet, I guess. Is that right, or what?
I would expect it to be there, so
Yeah.
that was my question,
Okay, and
but I will follow up with
that
it.
would be 20,000 too then, or would it be?
Yes, we bill the airline 20,400 every month.
Okay.
Yeah, I was looking at that the other day and I didn't notice that hole there, but there's a big hole there, isn't there?
Right.
Okay, if there's no other comments, do I hear a motion to approve as presented?
So moved.
I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Mr. Downs,
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom,
Yes.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Mr. Ha,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Okay, moving on, committees, reports, and discussion, to my knowledge, no executive committee meeting this past month. None for the budget committee. And capital projects committee, I think Doug was tentatively trying to get one arranged so we can work on some of these contracts with Ted's deal out there and the other deal with Mr. Shively. But that hasn't come about in his last correspondence. I don't know, you guys probably got some email from him also. He's
No,
talking about.
it was just for the committee, but,
Yeah, right. Oh, okay, you just sent it for the committee,
yeah, so
okay.
I think
But
Andrew was on that.
he's thinking about trying to get it together this Thursday. And he says he's got a doctor's appointment in Ludington at noon there, so if he does call back, or maybe I'll try to get hold of him and tell him that, hey, probably 2 o'clock would be a good time, so I can have.
I guess my only question is, if we have the meeting as productive, seems like the only holdup's the insurance. So I don't know if you were able to get the other parcel of land that was purchased added to the insurance policy yet, but I'm wondering if this gentleman's not willing to insure it, whether the airport can still insure it in the absence of him doing it, because that seems to be the only last remaining holdup, is he doesn't want to have to insure the hangar.
looks like Doug kind of convinced him, from what I was reading into it, that perhaps he was convincing him to do something about that.
Yeah, the last thing I
Yeah.
read in this today's,
Oh, yeah.
or yesterday's email was he wanted the airport's attorney
To
to
come up with.
come up with wording that he would hold the airport harmless if something were to happen, not that he was willing to get the insurance. I just wondering if we're still allowed to cover it.
Right, I mean, do we wanna talk about that here? 'Cause that
I'm just
was-
wondering if you're in
Because
contact with the insurance company, if that's a
I-
way you can get us some answer, if we have this meeting on
Right.
Thursday, if we can have that answer by
Right.
Thursday.
It's just if we wanna talk about it here, I kinda wanna give more background so those that are sitting around the table know the details of this.
Well, why don't we hold off until you have a chance to talk about your stuff?
Okay,
And then we'll cover
I mean,
this. Is that okay?
I would strongly recommend against allowing anything on this airport without liability insurance.
I concur.
So
That's my feeling also.
That's what I was wondering if you.
even if the airport is not held, that doesn't mean a pedestrian or someone walking around wouldn't be an issue, and if they sued, we would get sued regardless. I mean, that's just the way things work, so I just don't see that as being a viable request. To your other comment, I did have a conversation with the insurance company, and the additional property is covered.
Okay, moving on. Barry, you're up.
Okay. Let me hand out copies of various things. Actually, I'll start with handing out something that I don't actually intend to talk about this month, but I did mention last month.
We need more,
Need more?
we,
When we were talking about the Ted Aaron's land lease, it referenced a document which was the Airport Authority's land lease policy that we could find no official copy of that policy. I went back through a draft copy of that policy that was found, and then the minutes of the two meetings where it was discussed, applied all the changes to the draft from those minutes, and what you have here is a recreation of that policy. The only addition that I added is like in the first paragraph, the first sentence, I included the current rental rate. The policy describes how the rental rate is calculated after the first date of the agreement. Every 5 years it resets based on a cost of living adjustment factor. And that is the current rate that I incorporated in there. So that's just for your information. I believe the intention was that the committee was going to review this and potentially come back with recommendations as it ties into all of those subcontracts that are currently on the table.
So this is just pieces from the note, there was nothing ever officially,
There was a draft
Oh,
version
okay.
attached to one of the meeting minutes, which was essentially this, and then in the minutes themselves, it talked about board action to basically make changes to that draft and adopt it. So I basically took those minutes and that draft and recreated this.
good job.
So is this just a recreation of what was there for
It is.
information where it's not
This-
for us to approve?
No,
This is not for us to approve, it's just
Information.
the policy as it exists that the board approved 20 years ago.
And a lot of these items over here, they look very familiar with that lease that Ted Aaron signed that was written up for him.
So we would still need to update this.
If we want to, yes, if we think it needs updating after 20 years,
Right,
which it probably does. Okay, so I'm in the middle of handing things out. So, that is on the agenda here. So no incidents to report for the month. Last week, Tuesday through Thursday, we finally had our annual FAA airport inspection. The last 3 pages of your packet are the official, it's called a certification letter that comes out of that process. And I'll talk to that here. So overall, the inspection went well. I do have to say that this is probably the most thorough inspector in the 12 years I've been doing this that I've ever had. I've got over 3 pages of notes from the inspection of things he would like to see us improve on, even though they're not things that are formally written up. Generally, if it's formally written up, that's a bad thing.
4 pages?
Yeah,
What's
like
that?
3 pages of notes.
3 pages, 3 pages of notes.
And usually I get out with like about 1 page, so. Things that did come out of the inspection that will ultimately require dollars attached to them are additional signs are required. There's the layout of our pavements is such that we have a lot, I shouldn't say a lot, but we have 5 accesses off of our runways and taxiways to various pieces of equipment. FAA access, it's mostly FAA equipment. The weather reporting system, some of the navigation aids, etc.
Will the feds pay for this, or do we have to pay?
I'll get to that. So the way the FAA likes an airport laid out is that the recommended approach is that you have a perimeter road, and from the perimeter road you go into the airport to access the equipment. Our design is you go onto the runway and then access the equipment from there. We do not have a perimeter road. The reason they like that approach is you do not have other vehicles traveling runways and taxiways other than aircraft as frequently. That's not our layout. If you do have these access roads, there's a requirement that, for whatever reason, has never been noticed here or noted, is that basically you need a stop sign and an additional sign that identifies what surface you are approaching, so the runway, the taxiway, etc. In talking with Prina Newhoff, who just went through this at Escanaba as part of their inspection this year, so apparently this is one of the things that all the inspectors in the region are being asked to look out for. The set of signs and installation, they're estimating at about $1,500 per install. So 5 of those, $7,500 is the cost of that. When I mentioned that to the inspector, he said, "Oh, that can't be." And then he basically said, well, if you are getting technically spec signs, maybe it is, but you might be able to accomplish it less expensive. So I'm going to follow through on that. In the certification letter, this is one of the 3 issues that came up, and we have a date of 6/19 that it needs to be addressed by. In talking with Prina Newhoff, our current plan would be to roll this into the runway resurfacing project as an addendum onto that. So as it relates to cost, if we roll it into that project, we are essentially paying 2.5%, but we are using another $7,500 of our allotments to accomplish this task.
I thought we were still on where we didn't have any 2.5% match.
That is specific to the runway resurfacing only. Any other items that were not originally spec'd in that fall outside of that. And that also applies to the extra remarking that we needed to do, would not be covered by that 100% grant. So that is one of the items. The other item is, and this is more of a recent change in the specification, is how numbers are centered on the runway, that specification is changed. And basically, it means that things with ones, which are narrower, need to shift over than the way they used to do it. So for us, that means runways 10 and 19, the runway numbers aren't to current spec. For 10, since we're gonna be doing that paving project, tearing that up, we will get that addressed at that time. For 19, which we just painted this fall, this will be something that we'll have to address at the next painting cycle. So this is, in the certification letter, is one of the recommendation items. Basically, it's saying you're going to need to do this at a point in the future that's convenient, and if you don't, then it will become a certification issue.
I don't follow. Are you saying the number 1 is the wrong style, or?
It used to be that you centered the gap between the numbers on the center line.
Okay,
And now you center the total width of the numbers centered. And because 1 is narrow, it shifts it over about 5 or 6 feet.
Pretty important stuff.
I would have thought maybe they'd want to make the 1 bigger so you can see the sky.
Yeah, just make it wider.
Yeah.
Well, you did say inspector was very thorough.
He is very thorough. And as it relates to us is that when we do the next painting cycle, instead of just painting over the numbers, which is what you normally do, they're gonna have to sandblast off and then repaint, and that sandblasting, it makes the painting of the numbers about 3 times as expensive as if you don't have to sandblast. So it's probably a couple $1,000s of additional cost when that happens 2 years or so from now. So those are the items that came up that I see have costs associated with them. Everything else is paperwork, record keeping, tracking things, doing certain things better than we've been doing, changing our training records and our training materials, things along those lines.
So is Vets picking up any of that then, or is that at our cost, or?
It would be however we fund runway remarkings, or for the signs, again, as I mentioned, my intention in working with a consultant is that we would incorporate that as an add-on into the runway resurfacing project in early June.
Good idea.
You may want to touch base with sign costs with the road commission, that's in their wheelhouse.
It is, it's just that FAA standards are very specific, and that kind of gets into that area of, and I don't want to say that I would ever contemplate installing a sign that didn't meet specs, but the inspector did tell me that he probably wouldn't notice if it wasn't to spec.
Interesting comment.
That's something I
For
know.
somebody who's concerned about a few inches on the number,
That's
it's
very,
a little hard to,
You don't want to
Match
make
that.
that comment.
So, going to that attachment, those last 3 pages, so the 3 items that I'll say written up for, number 1 is that in our certification manual, we have a statement that says during winter time, we will have a NOTAM out there, which is basically a notice that our runways are not monitored when we're not here. Thus, you can't rely on the information about runway conditions being current because there's no one here looking or recording them. A couple years ago, the system for recording this information significantly changed, and there was a lot of confusion as to how you do this under the new system. And in some cases, there was conflicting information whether or not, as a result of that, it dropped off our radar, so we did not have that NOTAM out there. The inspector basically said, here's the text that's currently what you should be using, and we got it installed, so that was corrected before he left. Number 2 is training records. There's about 12 different categories of training that staff here needs to have. And the requirement is that you have to have recurrent training every 12 calendar months. And if you miss it even by a month, you are out of certification or out of spec. A year ago in November, we changed the order that 2 of our trainings were done. For a reason I don't read and remember, we switched May and November. And as a result of that switch, I was the one that failed to have training for a period of time within a 12-month period. That was already corrected by the time of the inspection because in November I had that training. But I need to write up a letter explaining the lapse and how we're going to not have that issue happen again. So I got until this Friday to do that. And then the third was the item I already talked about with the signs and the location of those signs and the specs that deal with that. And that correction date is, we've got until toward the end of June to do that.
So the only thing of a cost is $1,500 then, is that correct?
Per signs, and there are 5 signs. 5 locations, each location needs 2 signs.
7,500?
Yeah, so that's the consultant's estimate. And then the recommendation, which is the last page, talks about the centering of the painting of the designators of the runway. So, overall, it was a good inspection. Inspector was helpful to work with, gave us a lot of information, but like every inspection that we go through, the net result is it increases workload incrementally over time.
So how long was he here doing this inspection?
2.5 days.
2.5 days?
Yes.
Wow.
So you got here on Tuesday in the morning, and then we wrapped up about noon on Thursday. So that's the inspection. Next item is PFAS update. If you'll recall, back in the summer and prior, this was an issue, and at that time, the status is that the state had put together a grant program that would provide us about $20,000 to address our current issue, which is the fact that we're currently required by the FAA to annually test the equipment and the mix of the firefighting foam. PFAS is a component of the firefighting foam that we're required to use. The issue is that testing dispenses a small amount of the product into the environment. This is an emerging hazardous chemical, and thus it's a high priority at the state level. They had grant funding of about $20,000. The total project cost was estimated to be about $35,000. At that time, I don't know if it was a board recommendation or my recommendation or some combination of the two, but I reached out to Muskegon to see if we could share their equipment and only incur the cost of the hookups necessary on our fire vehicle and then the training, hoping to accomplish that within the $20,000 grant and not having any out-of-pocket costs. Moving forward, I reached out to Muskegon. They were amenable to the idea. Reached out to MDOT, and I heard back from them about 2 weeks ago that said that would not be acceptable to them. The grant was for the purchase of equipment, and if we didn't want to purchase the equipment and share it, we would not be able to use the grant money for training and other purposes.
Give me a reason for that? I mean, they're worried that we're gonna destroy it or something, or what?
The language of the grant is
man.
what it was intended for. So we are basically back to where we were in that I'm looking at probably a $15,000 expense to address this issue. Our next scheduled testing of the foam equipment is next August. So this is something that's gonna need to be addressed one way or another by then. So I'm just kind of giving the board a heads up that I followed through on that and was basically hit a dead end. Doesn't mean I'm not gonna try to question that. And it might be possible still to share and hopefully maybe reduce some of the cost, because there's two sets of the equipment. There's the testing unit itself and then the equipment to retrofit the vehicle. I'm hoping that the equipment to retrofit the vehicle would still be covered by the grant, and what wouldn't be covered is the training. So maybe we could still get by for less than a $15,000 bill, but as I had hoped of getting it all covered under the grant, that doesn't look like it's feasible right now.
What's the useful life of that equipment then, usually? Roughly?
I don't know I don't know, but, and this kind of comes back to the conversation we had when we last talked about this, is as part of the FAA reauthorization bill, the FAA has a mandate from Congress to come up with an alternative product that doesn't contain these hazardous chemicals, such that, you know, likely within the next 5 years, this equipment will no longer be necessary because we'll have moved on to a more environmentally friendly product.
And the equipment doesn't use that particular
And then
product, I
it
guess.
makes this whole set of stuff irrelevant at that time. But that's not where we currently stand. So that's my update on that, and I will keep the board further updated as we move forward with this process.
Yeah, there was something in the news about that with the EPA and so on the other day where you're talking about trying to find a new procedure, new chemical and so on. They're very, they said we're not very successful on that. So what they did was modify the training that they had set up for users. So it's just a one-shot type deal instead of all over the place.
Right.
Something like that.
So until they come up with alternatives,
Right,
you know,
right.
minimizing the amount of product that's dispersed in the environment is obviously the next
I
best
think-
thing that you can
In
do.
my opinion, I think it's in a big gray hole.
Okay, moving on then to January airfares. So we'll see here is that, I can zoom in a little bit. So as we get into the dead of winter, airfares coming down, our average fare in January decreased by $93. Traverse City decreased by 58. Grand Rapids stayed relatively the same, and Muskegon's decreased by 10. What I find really enlightening is this continuing story of the fare pricing out of Traverse City is continuing to amaze me. I mean, you'll see here that the average out of Traverse City is just $6 more than Grand Rapids as of this snapshot, which that's never happened in the 10 years that I've been tracking this. You know, Traverse City has the lowest fares in about, you know, a good third plus of these 20 destinations. The expansion and competition up in Traverse City has dramatically changed, and with Allegiant now starting service this winter, it's a different ballgame regionally for our service than it has been for decades. And obviously that plays into our role in all of this as well. When you include the fact that we're now the only airport that doesn't charge for parking, it really kind of levels the playing field. So you basically see the average fare if you include a week's worth of parking. And again, that's just an estimate of some of these other costs, is it puts basically us, Traverse City and Grand Rapids, pretty much on par with airfares versus, and you know, Muskegon's a little bit of an outlier there. But I found this data point, and it's just 1 month, everything changes, but it's continuing a pattern that we've been seeing through the course of this year.
Barry, as I'm looking at this, it looks like we're lower than everyone else on this, so am I missing something on this, or what?
No.
I guess, where are you,
I'm just looking at, in Chicago out of.
for Chicago, yes, for that one destination, so.
But that's primarily our business, isn't it, really?
Well, it
Little more.
is probably because of the limitations of our service.
Mhm, mhm.
That's what we've been focusing on from a marketing standpoint. But that's not necessarily the need for our community, is just going to Chicago or having people in Chicago coming here. That's why, you know, this is presenting a more holistic picture
I got
of
it.
all the destinations that are kind of the top destinations nationally for air travel. When I originally put this list together, I basically looked at the top 20 destinations out of Traverse City
Mhm.
and basically said, you know, that would be representative of our region. So that's kind of where these originally came from.
And so if you wanna go to Chicago, it's great, but if you don't wanna go anyplace else,
Correct. And then you layer on the challenges of how our service operates in Midway with connecting, you know, those are all additional negatives that go beyond price. Looking at employment numbers, so for the month of November, I had given you guidance last month that I expected us to be down about 30%. We
Yes,
ended up down 39%. Basically, the bottom fell out in November. December is tracking the same. We're currently down about 30%. Service has been terrible. It's probably the best way to summarize it. And I will get much more into the details of that. I had about a half-hour conversation earlier this morning with Jim Gallagher on current status of some of these items. And again, I'll talk about that later in my report. And for the on-time performance, I kind of have a caveat there, because is something on time if a week before a passenger was planning to fly, they got notified that their flight was going to be 5 hours late? So that's really the two numbers, is that 79% not on time reflects what was originally scheduled versus what ended up happening. And then the 19% is, you know, based on day of what the schedule was that day, not being on time. So we inconvenienced a huge number of people during the month of November through Thanksgiving, and are doing it again over Christmas and New Year's.
What's the cause of that, just plain or violence or what?
Both, and I'll get you more details in a bit. So, this came up when we were looking at the bills. So the bills you saw paid for were what I've been reporting the last couple of months, where the meter had gone out and we had a replace or a loaner that got repaired. So basically the cost of the meter and 2 service calls were essentially that bill. The updating of the fuel system monitor, I'm still waiting on the quotes to come back from the 2 vendors. Land acquisition. We are now ready to submit the grant reimbursement for the final closeout of that project. We've been waiting on the final relocation costs invoices being submitted by Mr. Adamczyk, and kind of going through the negotiation process of what will be covered, what won't be. Those are all now finalized, so we are hoping to put together that final reimbursement package for the state either the end of this month or early January. It will include those final relocation costs for Mr. Adamczyk. There are Prina Newhoff expenses related to this. I've reached out to Susan a couple times now, just to make sure that she's aware that we need to pull together all of our documentation for any legal fees associated with this project, because those are reimbursable. So she's going through and looking at our billing, and if it's not clear, we need to go back to George and basically get that itemized in a way that it's clear that those hours were related to this project. And then in the first reimbursement, which was the majority of the project, the total amount of that reimbursement was more than the grant amount at the time. So there's a little bit of carryover that will get incorporated into this final closeout. So the good news is this will replenish our coffers a little bit, because we've kind of been having these expenses out there, knowing that we would get reimbursed for them. I don't know, what that total will be yet, because I don't really have a good, clear understanding as to how much of our legal expenses over the last couple years have been related to this project.
Were the reimbursement relocation costs for Mr. Adamski kind of reasonable, or just, I don't know, I'm just out of curiosity, were they sky high or seemed reasonable or what?
In my opinion, no, but we're following the process.
No, in the sense that we're higher than expected.
Higher than would seem
Compared to what?
reasonable.
I know it, it's just a gut feeling I have.
If the
Right,
feds are
right.
involved in it, it's.
Trust your gut.
Okay. Sometimes you get a bill for something you weren't expecting, and it's so damn high, you just say, what in the world went wrong here?
Our basically capital improvement plan, so, and this is something, it also appears a little bit later on our agenda, but, so our runway resurfacing, we're still scheduled, basically last part of May, first week of June. The change order is drafted, and I had brought this to the board 2 months ago, and the feedback from the board was that I should take it back to Mr. Saylor to basically reach back out to Reeve Riley and basically question why they theoretically are getting benefit from their actions, or the actions of them not following through in the contract, while we're ultimately being, forced to pay for it. I followed up with Mr. Saylor 4 times, some via phone, some in person, last week via email, and he has taken no action on that. In the meantime, I'm getting feedback from the state that our grant funding is potentially becoming in jeopardy, because we have nothing to submit for this quarter for any expenses on this project. The state really wants to submit information under the grant this quarter by the end of this calendar year, by the end of this month. So I really need the board to approve something today. So my request would be that we approve the contract modification that I basically circulated 2 months ago. I have copies here, which essentially increases the contract award by just shy of $50,000 for the extra remarking that was necessary to be done in September.
That's all federal funds then, or it's
It is federal funds,
state, whatever?
but 2.5% is ours, and it comes out of our, basically our $150,000 a year entitlements. So, we are not able to use this for other projects.
Were we gonna use this prior to this, a few months ago, or 6 months ago, when we're trying to get some, closure on what's going on with the contractor that's not being able to provide?
I guess I'm not sure what you're asking there, because that is the project.
Is it gonna cost us more money? I guess I'll just say that, how's that?
It is going to cost us more money, yes.
Okay, and roughly,
Roughly, physical costs, it's 2.5% of $50,000.
okay, it's about,
Opportunity costs, we can't use that $50,000 for the next project on our list. So that potentially pushes something further down the pipeline. The fact that we have to close the airport for another 10 days does have other revenue losses associated with it, et cetera. So, a variety of things, but that is my update on that. Again, it is later on the agenda under
So-
business.
Because they didn't do it when they were supposed to, they're charging us more now to do it later.
No,
And we
that's,
don't have information we need from our attorney.
so, it's not that it's costing more because it's done later, it's the fact that we have to essentially do this marking twice.
Well, yeah.
So that's the extra cost, is the extra quantities of paint marking
And we
necessary.
wanted information from Mr. Saylor on why we should be liable for that.
We had asked
Nothing
To
him to go back to
renegotiate.
All right.
Reeve Riley and basically point out the fact that we didn't think this was necessarily a fair arrangement.
It shouldn't be costing us money, additional money because of their labor issues.
Right,
It costs twice, right?
right.
Yeah.
And paid the numbers twice.
Right.
So,
And, I mean, I hate to say this on the record, on the film, but once again, we're having something delayed or complicated because of our response or lack of from Mr. Saylor, correct?
I think that is a fair characterization, yes.
Okay.
So Barry, what would you like from us? Repeat what you want from us again. and then-
It's on the agenda later and we can
Okay,
deal with the issue
Okay.
at its proper place on the agenda. Wildlife survey, that's been completed for a couple months now.
Did they find anything?
Oh, yes, you always find wildlife. There are recommendations in that survey that I want Karina Newhoff's review of, and I'm waiting for that before I sign off on the draft that I have. Because, and it's interesting, so I was talking earlier about having a perimeter road and then having our accesses to this, which would, then we wouldn't need to pay for these signs. The wildlife survey is also recommending that we have a perimeter road because one of the things they want us to be able to do is to easily drive the perimeter to check the integrity of the fence.
This would be on the inside of the fence.
Inside of the fence
And we'll
and
do it with a 2-track and a side-by-side.
which would be, and a lot of times what airports do is like for our runway resurfacing, is they basically just grind up that aggregate and then use that to give you basically a 2-track, an improved 2-track access around. That's not been something that we've been scheduled in, partly because it's not been justified. I want to make sure that the language in the wildlife hazard assessment gives us the checkbox so that in the future we can get that accomplished and paid for. So, again, I want the language to be appropriate so that we can use it as justification for future work.
We don't wanna do it twice.
And we don't want to necessarily incur other costs because we're not getting it done
Yeah.
as well. So that's the status of that, and then since we're now in a new fiscal year, we should be really working on, both of the last two are projects from last fiscal year, but we should be working on this fiscal year's project, which is our updated airport layout plan, which is about a $200,000 line item, basically in consulting and fees to basically update
That's an
these
astronomical amount.
I don't disagree with that, but that is the
Yeah,
standard rate.
I think that's, 20, we should be able to accomplish that. What do I know?
Moving on, air service update, so I'll give you some of the additional details that I glossed over earlier. So, I already mentioned we're down 39% for November. I kind of just explained my caveat on the numbers, so 79% of flights did not depart as originally scheduled. But you could say that technically maybe only 19% were delayed based on the revised rolling schedule that happened throughout the month. There are certification issues that continue. As I was putting this presentation together, I was amused by the fact that last month I said, and that should be addressed, you know, like the day that we had the last month's meeting. Well, we're still not there a month later. There are crew issues, and December is going to mirror November for many of the same reasons. And, you know, in looking at the numbers we're now having in November and December, we've lost the last 5 years of progress, and we're back to where we were in 2014, 2013, as far as it relates to our passenger numbers. So, schedules being changed kind of on a rolling basis. So right now, they've changed the schedule through Christmas. Have not yet changed the schedule for the first week of January, and per my conversation, that will also need to happen for the second week of January and maybe the third week of January. What is happening is our published schedule for the winter had been an 8:30 departure and a 5 p.m. or 7 p.m. return. And what we're ending up with is basically last winter's schedule, so a midday coming in at noon and departing at 12:40. So if you were planning on going out at 8:30, you're going out at 12:40. If you were planning on coming in at 7 p.m., you're actually coming in at noon. So any connection you have is completely shot. Thus, change fees, and it's.
Are all these 79% flights and the schedule changing because of the Beechcraft 1900 certification issues, or
Yes,
are
in
they
fact,
connected?
the plane intended to operate this fall, technically a year and a half ago
Right.
was when it was originally supposed to start per the agreement, is not yet ready. And again, I'll get into a little bit more detail based on my conversation I had just before this meeting. Ultimate Jet can generally only fly Monday through Friday, so that has left Saturdays and Sundays kind of on a week by week who's going to show up to provide service. As it related to Thanksgiving and now into December, traditionally we add flights because of the demand. So normally Thanksgiving, Wednesday before and Sunday after, we've run 3 flights. You know, this year we didn't even fill 1 because of all of the schedule changes and not knowing what was happening. Same thing with December. There's no way we can be adding flights to accommodate demand because we've basically turned that demand away. Let me see. Talk about that. So the update I got and some of the more details on where things stand. So let's first talk about the airplane itself. So the certification issue was with the flight data recorder. That is now installed. The aircraft has been put back together after that installation, and the testing of it, basically the reports, the printouts of it, basically are all completed. There is still follow-up paperwork that is being needed from the shop that did the work, basically wiring diagrams, etc., so that the FAA can go through and review all the paperwork and sign off on it. So we are much closer, but it's the holidays, you know, getting turnaround time for the FAA, so it still is probably a couple weeks out before that's going to be signed off by the FAA as being an airplane that is airworthy with these changes. So that's the airplane schedule. Crew schedule. So the crew has been in training, or I shouldn't say training, that's probably the wrong word, but certification during this period of time while the aircraft has been going through its issues. The crew that had been hired needed to accomplish a couple of things. One is recurrent or new training in this particular type of aircraft. For turbojets and jets, you need aircraft-specific training and check rides, etc., that you don't necessarily need for other types of aircraft. And the crew needed to do that. Ultimate Jet, who is the planned operator of this aircraft, was doing that process, because the crew would be under their, basically, they would be their crews, the plane would be on their flight certificate, etc. They had hired 4 crew members, 2 as first officers, 2 as captains. Went through all of the training, actually went through extra training because the process has been elongated. The 2 first officers passed, both of the captains failed. And the company doing the training basically said it's unlikely they will pass. So I got this update about 2 weeks ago that basically said there is now, even if we get a plane, we don't have anybody, and to start a hiring process and then training, etc., is going to be an extended period of time. That's kind of where we still are, although in my update from this morning, today, someone that Jim Gallagher has an offer out to as a captain. If he decides to accept that offer, he has experience operating this type of aircraft, so it would just be necessary recurrent training. It is conceivable that starting probably the second week of January, that aircraft will have accomplished its certification, and this captain will be in position and certified to begin operations with the 2 first officers that had previously been hired and finished their training successfully.
But that's only one captain.
That's only
We're
one.
talking about-
So the limitation there is basically a number of days per
Okay.
period of time that can be operated. So what that would mean is that he could be captain 3 weeks per month and would then be required to take a 7-day, basically, you can only have so many duty days per month of operation. So one scenario there is that we have our normal schedule 3 weeks a month, and then 1 week a month we have, the non-normal schedule. But we could, plan that out and essentially kind of in one fell swoop make all those changes from now through April, May.
And wait for Gallagher to come up and throw the next monkey wrench in the process. That's what's been ongoing.
It has been the track record for a number of months.
So I'm just, since we're going up the beach 1900 flying in and out of here, what are we using to fly in and out?
So Ultimate Jet is
Using
generally operating Monday through
a
Friday
jet.
with the jet,
Okay.
with the different schedule.
Okay. Okay.
And on Saturday and Sunday, the last couple weeks, it has been Ultimate Jet. They basically brought aircraft in from other parts of the country to do this. Ultimate Jet has a plane sitting in Midway Monday through Friday during the day, which is why that works for them Monday through Friday. On the weekends, they don't. So then to accomplish things, they have to bring in, this past weekend, the aircraft came in from somewhere in the Carolinas, I don't remember what airport.
How many seats does this plane have then?
It has 30, but what is filed with DOT for the charters is only 19 seats, so we're not actually allowed to even sell more than 19 seats right now.
Which we can't be, we're not
Which
doing
we're not-
anyway because
well,
we're not connecting and
Over
everybody's
Christmas,
upset.
maybe we could have for a few days, but come January 2nd,
All right,
that's not gonna be an issue.
okay. That's-
So then the
that's-
only other thing on this as it relates to other stuff before us today is, as it relates to Ted Aaron's hangar. So clearly, until we have an 1800, there isn't a need for that hangar. And quite frankly, that is probably the lowest issue that Jim is tracking right now. Airplane crews are what's most important, hangars not. But we do have, under old business, that lease, that basically that the proposed essentially donation of that property to the airport at the end of this, and I will talk more about where that stands in a bit. Any questions on where we stand?
Is his contract up in the end of the fiscal year?
End of the fiscal year, yes.
And you're gonna get into the RFP and everything?
Correct.
So by the time you get through with trying to file anything with breach of contract, that would even, none of that would probably even get accomplished by the time this contract expires anyway.
Yes and no. I mean, if you think logistically about the situation we're in, we're basically, the holidays are whatever they're going to be. Winter is not a significant demand period for us. Summer is obviously where we get the most of our travelers. The contract currently expires, the end of,
Summer.
in the fall. Intentionally so that we wouldn't be switching contracts, because the last iteration, it was ending end of July. So we've now moved it out. It doesn't make sense to try to change something in the middle of summer.
No, but
However,
I'm wondering if we
a
could
May,
sever and if we could get approval to update ahead of schedule and have a 2.25 year contract, because right now, at the rate things are going,
Right.
everything's gonna go up in smoke. You've got factors of Traverse City's cost is infringing on it, number one, and the constant scheduling.
right.
Who the hell wants to fly when you don't know when your connecting flight is going to, why
So-
even attempt it?
Yep. So if DOT gets the RFP out in January, as I'm anticipating, it would be a quick turnaround in that process to get a new carrier in here before summer. But not necessarily impossible, but we would run a risk that actually would end up happening in July. Or we just go through the current contract and have things turn over when they were anticipated. Because again, they're launching an RFP intending to have a new carrier in here October 1st. Moving that up 4 months is
I guess my
aggressive
question would
schedule.
be, based on what you just said and you just said, is do we have a responsibility to at least file a notice of breach? Not saying that we would follow through on it, but to put the intent out there so that we don't miss any time of the essence clauses.
Right.
Because the breach is happening now and has been happening for the last couple of months.
I think if we looked at the language of the contract, it might be a gray area whether this actually constitutes a breach, because he is flying, we do have service daily, it's just the means and how everything about it has been done it's not accomplishing our goals. But, I understand what you're saying, and if you want me to, I can, work with George Saylor on looking into the legal language on that.
Which may or may
So
not
this-
happen in a town,
So
Yeah,
might
so
as
it's
well
just
wait till
intend on-
September then.
Just bang your head on
Well,
the
you know,
wall.
what you're saying there is that we've got all these problems here. I mean, you might wanna take a look at trying to jump with a new carrier in July. I mean,
Well, before July,
before
actually.
July, yeah, ideally, but even so, we've got this problem right now, and it may continue all the way through the summer, so if we ride through until October, we're gonna lose the summer. So why not take our bites and everything else and jump on it in June or July, June or
My
May?
question is, do you need to file something
Right.
like, because
To
you're under
help
contract?
that
To
happen.
Yeah.
break the
Because
contract that we've
Even if
got.
they are, which is with a government body, probably not the norm to get them to move that quickly, but you would still need a way out of your current agreement.
Okay,
Yeah, but we,
Right.
they're not providing through
Right,
what's in the
we
contract.
have to
so-
have
But he's saying it may not even reach to the level of breach.
all right.
The-
But we need something
This-
there to allow us to break the contract.
Yeah.
That's what you're
Yeah.
saying.
But the damage it's doing, I mean,
What do we got?
even if you switch,
Well, you have to be allowed to switch.
Right, so
Right.
that's,
That's the
that's
first
the
one.
first step. So, what I'm hearing is I need to
See whether
research
we can,
that.
yeah. whether
What's this
we
guy
are allowed
intend
to
on
switch.
flying this summer? Are they going back to the jets?
That we don't know probably.
We have not had that conversation.
My guess is Gallagher makes more money with the Beach 19 than he does with the Ultimate
Oh, yeah.
Jet Service. So that's gonna be a driving factor. And he's probably not making enough money with this at the moment, but for,
But he's not making any money with the beach either right now.
nobody's making anything.
I know it,
It's-
nobody's
it's-
done anything done.
And it's killing us in the process.
Yeah,
And
everything
he's
was-
just trying to survive day to day.
but if the damage is done to the reputation, I can't imagine you're gonna be able to go back to the 30 passenger because you're already losing all your customers.
Yeah.
It's,
Well, it doesn't matter if it's here or not. If you had a ticket for a connection out of Midway at,
No, I'm saying come
Well,
come
April,
summer.
right,
come summer, when they
Doesn't
go back to
matter
the
what you
normal
got out
schedule,
there.
you're doing so much damage right now, who's even gonna
Right.
wanna book them?
right. Mhm,
In the competition.
right. So we got a double-headed sword there.
Any other questions or comments on this topic or this information?
you know, if we need anything legislatively, please let me know. And I can make those contacts.
Good news, though, is the billing issues that we had with DOT and getting reimbursed. I had reported last month that everything got submitted, payments came in at the end of November, so we're kind of caught up on that set of things. So, where things stand, not really much has moved since I reported this last month. I'm still monitoring what's kind of going on in the region as far as essential air service bids as it relates to other cities. I've requested to DOT that when they put out the RFP, that they make it flexible such that we have some of the seasonality differences that our market tends to have. I have not yet heard back from them. I still have on my to-do list is providing some requested information to SkyWest and a follow-up call with Cape Air.
Where is Cape Air?
They are based in Hyannis,
Makes
Massachusetts.
sense.
They are the EAS provider for all of the Montana cities, so there's like 6 or 7 cities they provide service there. A few throughout the Midwest, a few in the Northeast, and then they also do a lot of flying in the Caribbean in the summer.
And these are jets, are they then?
No, these are 9-seat aircraft is what they fly. I'm still expecting, based on typical timings, that DOT will be releasing the RFP just after the holidays. This is the list of everybody that hasn't changed from last month. These are who has recently been submitting bids in kind of the Great Lakes region. And every one of those is basically on my, list to be contacting at some point in this process and seeing, where they stand as it relates to possibly providing a service.
Is there a R missing in that last,
Yes, there is. North County, North Country.
that would be a small airline.
As you can probably imagine, on the marketing side on this, we just kind of have our hands up in the air right now. We've basically turned down our marketing spend as low as it can reasonably go. We've discontinued everything on social media. The only thing we're still doing is some remarketing ads through Google for people who've come to our website before. We're basically just, giving you ads that remind us that we're still here. But we don't want to touch anything on social media because that's such a platform for people commenting, and given all of the negative things that are going on right now, we don't want to give people a platform or a reason that they don't already have to complain about our service. So we're saving some money here, at least per budget, although we'll need to reinvest it later once the future becomes more clear. Our informal plan right now is once we have something that's stable and that we believe we can trust, that will basically go out with a big apology and basically acknowledge all the bad things that have happened and not try to brush it away, and then come out with a fair sale that basically is basically a sign of goodwill that, we're back, things are stable, hopefully as they used to be. We've missed one and will miss the second. Two of our biggest fair selling days of the year, Cyber Monday is by far our biggest, and we forewent that. The winter solstice, the 21st, is our second biggest sales day of the year. Again, we're not going out there pushing this until we can have some confidence that we have a product that's worthy of pushing it. So, assuming we can relaunch our marketing efforts, our fair sale would basically be replacing those two, kind of probably in a similar vein as to the size and scope of them. So that's where we stand on marketing right now.
Barry, are you getting a lot of negative input back to your office or your number or someplace else, or is it going to our advertising company?
I've had a series of people call me. Generally, if they're calling me, it's generally because they're long-established, regular customers who I have a relationship with. Most day-to-day complaints just go to the airline, and I certainly don't want to be Amy, who's their primary customer service person, going through what she's gone through over the last 6 weeks. But so yes, I'm hearing a good amount, but I don't get the brunt of it.
Okay.
And that is all I have to report. Any questions?
Were you going to cover what you want to cover before allowing us to give you permission to go forward with something that you've talked about before?
Everything else that I want to talk about is at a place on the agenda, so.
Okay.
The only thing that came out of this was I will follow up with George Saylor and look at what options we have with regards to our current contract with public charters.
Okay. Then let's move on to strategic plan. Barry?
I guess last month we talked a little bit about this as it related to what your goals were for a new contract for air service. I basically have captured that information and we'll be using that through this process. I guess my next question is given the strategic plan that is now at the end of its life, given some board changeover as it comes to the beginning of the calendar year next year, how does the board want to utilize the strategic plan and possibly adjust it or update it?
The one that exists right now, that goes back, what, 5 years, 4 years?
5 years actually,
Um,
with an update 2 years into that.
You know, my honest opinion, I really didn't like that strategic plan to begin with. I thought it was a lot of fluff and a lot of muck, but that's my opinion. I can see us right now, maybe tabling that matter until January, until we get a new team
Well,
on
that-
board. That's
Yeah, I
what
mean,
you want to do?
I'm assuming we're not gonna do
Right, no,
anything
no, I
today
didn't wanna do
or
it.
even the next couple months.
Okay,
I just wanna know what your thoughts are going
My
forward.
suggestion would be for 2020, the board come up with okay, here's what we would like to see come out of the RFP process, but I don't know how you develop a long-term strategic plan until you know what kind of bid responses you're gonna get. Because you could have what you have already, but then if you only end up with 9-seat planes and
all right.
people providing, then no matter what we want, if that's not even an option, then you're just spinning your wheels.
Because if I remember in that plan there, they were talking about us being further ahead in terms of growth than what we are now.
That is
Fair
definitely
amount.
true, because
And that didn't
falling
happen.
backwards.
It looked like it was gonna happen, but it didn't happen as it turned out.
But the other thing is that of that current strategic plan, I'd say roughly a third of it relates to airline and airline service issues, and the other
Right,
2/3
well,
are
we-
about
we've
other
used-
aspects
right.
of the airport.
We've used some of it as a guide, and it's, we've somewhat followed it, and, it hasn't been too bad, as long as you pull pieces out instead of trying to do, in my mind, the big list of things that were in there. We picked out several smaller things, and we kind of guided our way down those paths with that.
And I hear what you're saying, that from a capital standpoint, you still need to develop that out. I guess my concern would be is if the plan is still to develop out your capital for 10,000 employments and future growth, but if we don't have a provider to ever get us there, then is that a waste of capital?
So I would say, does everybody have a copy of the old one to read and review and think about or take home with them?
I hope so, if not,
Well, I'm asking, if
certainly
not, then we
give
can get
that
some
to
out.
everybody.
I believe I have it in my
Okay,
office.
okay, if not, then we'll go from there.
One other thing I will add to this is, I had mentioned earlier, a $200,000 item for our airport layout plan update. As part of that is going to be a narrative in that document that kind of talks about where we see the future going. So there's potentially some, we can distill a lot from the current plan, but during that process, we may come to the board and basically ask, for your thoughts on certain items as it relates to that, because that document will generally, it's something that gets updated every 20 years, so that's kind of a really, whatever we say there will have a long shelf life. So,
One of the things we have done is we've made progress on the facilities, done some improvements, some are required by the feds and things, but, I think we've had some success in that area.
Correct. Slower than we'd like, but still moving.
Mhm.
So anyway.
okay,
If we don't
so
get planes coming in here, it's not.
that's-
what I'm hearing is we will table that for at least probably 6 months until the other issues that are really currently before us get straightened out, and then we will see what role a strategic plan should play going forward.
That would be my opinion.
Okay.
How about the rest of you guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So I had mentioned earlier, a little handout. This is the contract modification for the Reith Riley contract.
There's 2 or 3 here.
So as I said earlier, last week, I reached out again to George Saylor after the previous time when I was in his office negotiating Ted Aaron's contract with him. But last week I reached out to him and basically said, I need this information by Monday. It's, basically the things I said earlier. MDOT is basically concerned that we're putting our grant in jeopardy by not timely following up on things, and I heard nothing back. So my request and recommendation would be for us to approve this document. I think it is in our best interest to make sure that we are not jeopardizing any grant funding. It obviously does come with the 2.5% share cost of the $50,000 plus some of the opportunity costs that using this funding incurs, but I think that is better than potentially other alternatives at this point. And if the board so chooses, since Doug is not here, I would request that you authorize me to sign this document.
Now, who put this document together?
MDOT
Okay.
puts this together.
Okay.
Oh, there's a lot of items.
Well, it's kind of one of the things, you don't have probably a lot of choice in the matter, so.
I think you're right.
With that, I will make that motion and authorize Barry Lind as the airport manager to be the signator.
Do I hear a second on that?
I'll second it.
Do we need a roll call on that? Probably.
I would recommend.
When in doubt, always roll call.
That's what I remember that, yeah. That's the thing, I remember that, you saying that. So go ahead.
Is there,
Oh.
that's all right. I'm assuming there's still no assurances in here that these dates are going to be held out, if they're still having a strike.
The word that we have from Reith Riley is that they will make those happen. We do have, I believe we actually have something in writing from them that says they would forego the other exit clauses that they've used in the past, if this situation wasn't resolved at this time. So their intention is to hit these dates.
Are they still on strike?
It is unclear to me. I have not found anything definitive in the press one way or another on that. But this time of year, not a lot of paving going on,
Yeah.
so it's hard to know.
Okay.
Mr. Gentili,
Yes.
Mr. Haw,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Dents,
Yes.
Mr. Bergstrom.
Yes.
Yes, they are still on strike.
They are, and yes, there is still paving going on, I've noticed that, it's kind of odd.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, because I know there was I went down to the other side of the state about 3 weeks ago, and a section of Highway 10 by Claire that they were working on this summer, it was still open and they were still working on it, and there was snow on the ground, that was the first snow there. So, and I noticed several of those bigger trucks still traveling the highway here and there. So they're still doing some work someplace. I don't know if it's Reith Rally or not, or Elmer's, or one of the other ones, but anyway. Okay, so, next item here. Shively, any comments on that? Or-
Well, I guess I just want to make the board aware of the current status of this topic. So we basically right now have a standard hangar rental agreement that we use for all of our hangars with Ryan for the hangar in question. He is actively moving forward in all of the capital fixes that are talked about that we've talked about and that are in the draft agreement with him. In fact, there's basically a $20,000 door sitting there in a pile to be installed and assembled. So he is moving forward. I'm a little uncomfortable with him moving forward on a hangar that we still own and he's making significant modifications to. So, and I know Doug's email said that his intention is, and he's been, going back and forth with Ryan on the details of this, would be to basically get together and try to wrap this up later this week. But even if the committee, wraps this up, that still doesn't give the opportunity for the board to ratify that agreement. So I'm just mentioning what is going on, kind of full steam ahead, even though the contracts aren't yet caught up to that process. And if you want me to do anything as a result of that information, I'd be happy to, but.
I think we're gonna contact Doug and see if we can't get this meeting going to go over this, because I was very surprised at this email also saying that his door is out there, $20,000 door, and no paperwork's been signed or anything like that, so I don't know whether he's pushing us to get off dead center or what the deal is, but.
He has an
We can't-
airplane
we-
that needs a place
Yeah,
for the winter and better if it has a door, so.
It's kind of unusual for something like this to go on.
Is it more of the risk on his end, though? He's putting a $20,000
Yes,
door into
absolutely.
property he doesn't own.
Right, which I can't quite understand his thought process on this.
Well, as
Keeps
my,
the airplane out of the weather.
Well, I know, but still,
we have given every indication we're going to come to
Right,
an
we
agreement,
have.
so
Yeah.
it's just a matter of
Like I
a
said,
fine detail.
the only thing I saw in the email that I think is a hang-up is the
It's the
insurance,
insurance.
okay, well, it's.
which I can't imagine the insurance would be that much.
Wouldn't
Wouldn't
think,
think so.
you wouldn't think for
That
empty.
he's willing to go buy a $20,000 door and he's not willing to pay $100 for insurance?
Probably more than that, but I guess, and maybe I'm unclear in reading Doug's synopsis, is the only requirement we would have would be liability insurance, no property insurance, and I'm not sure Ryan has made that distinction, because the property insurance probably could be somewhat significant, but that's.
But I mean, I'm sure he's gonna want insurance on the plane that's in there.
Correct.
So adding a liability clause isn't gonna really add to the price of his property insurance.
Right.
Right, now Ted has insurance out there that I know in the paperwork and so on, he's had to present to the airport authority and so
It is a
on.
standard requirement, yes.
So, could we pull a copy of that and show this to Mr. Shively if there's some question as to which way to go?
I'm honestly, I don't think we have anything current for Ted, so, but it's not.
His intent is to run a business out of it, right?
eventually.
Right,
So he's gonna have to have liability insurance for that anyway.
correct.
Right, and just the
And I-
fact that he's
and
got
the-
people around there.
That's partly why I said earlier is I think we need to be very clear that our expectations are for all tenants to have liability insurance, because I don't wanna go down a path where, we allow this and then, oh, well, now I don't want it for this, et cetera.
I agree.
It's $100 for liability.
I'm just throwing a number out there, I'm like,
Okay,
I can't imagine if he's already gonna have all these other insurances, adding that portion of it can't add that much in value to it. Even if he goes with a high deductible, it's not gonna be that costly, I can't imagine.
well, it's really to his benefit too, so,
Right,
So again, I'm
be a problem.
giving an update, status of what's going on. I think your comment of that he probably has the most risk because, he's got real money sitting on the ground there without the agreement in place. But again, as Jeff pointed out, everything we've done up to this point says, we want to do this, it's just not there yet.
Okay, well, let me see if I can get hold of Doug to see whether we can set up this meeting and get this worked out and get something put together here for Mr. Shively to sign, so we get this out of the way.
Barry, have you had conversations with him recently then? I take it or not, or?
He stops in occasionally just to give me updates as to progress he's making, but the negotiations all been in Doug's court up to this point.
Okay, so, you know, it shouldn't be a big deal about who having liability coverage.
The first I heard of that issue was last night when I read that
Okay, so
email,
you,
so.
maybe need just a discussion with him.
I think
Take care of
Doug is having that conversation.
Oh, Doug is,
And
okay.
I'm just,
Okay,
I got a confirmation based on, you know, what I'm hearing today, that, you know, where to go with that, so.
Okay, now one more thing that kind of is in my mind here. Someplace in there, Doug said he was gonna put in his letter of resignation today. If we go forward with this meeting, he's not really
A board member.
board member anymore.
Well-
So how do we jump that hurdle?
Doesn't mean he can't participate.
That's
And,
correct,
and,
but-
you know, it's just, he's not in the official capacity.
Okay, so that shouldn't
And-
bother us, and
The
it's
consultant.
And he did
Consultant.
submit that letter
Okay.
earlier.
So it's effective today?
I honestly haven't read it.
So let me ask
Um,
this, if I give him a call, he may not answer, and says, I'm flying around the countryside, in my new business here and so on, I just can't make it, so we've gotta have another plan to go forward and so on.
Well, you got a contact number for Shively is all that matters, so. It's just a matter of touching base with him and saying, you know, what, you know, Doug ain't gonna leave you high and dry.
No, I know he won't, but I'm just saying, what if, there's always a what if.
It didn't.
So
I was
let me
hoping
try to contact Doug and
He
then
just
we'll
said
go from
that
there,
this would
okay?
be his last meeting. So his letter, I was hoping he actually said as of December 31st, but he didn't. He just said that December would be his last regular meeting as a member of the authority.
Oh, so it doesn't have a date in there, just
It doesn't.
December?
Yes.
Oh, okay,
So-
so I think we're still good. That's a little different than saying December 16th.
Correct, yes.
Okay,
Do I need to do, oh, he did send Jill,
Yeah, he sent it to Bill, and that, yes.
okay, I was gonna say.
so right now, as I said, I'll leave it like that and I'll try to get hold of Doug. And then I'll touch base with you when you're, Andrew, is that okay? And, moving on to Ted Aaron's language.
So last month, we as a board talked about this, Ted was here, and based on that conversation, I went back to George Saylor and we drafted an agreement with the terms as were discussed here, which basically said that we would take over ownership of that hangar as of April 15th, which would be the end of the lease that Ted and Jim were negotiating. I sent that agreement after it got drafted to Mr. Aarons, and his response was that he felt that he would prefer to have the date, instead of being April 15th, to be December 31st of this year, and that he was intending to get Public Charters to agree to pay him $5,000 to rent for the month of December. And that we would then take over after that, and we would then negotiate a lease with Public Charters for January through April.
So they're gonna pay him $5,000 even though the plane's not here?
I think.
So
that's-
my response was, yes, but my response was that what he and Jim negotiate is up to them, but that if it was expected that the airport was going to need a lease for January through April, that we would probably be requesting on the order of $1,000 a month for that period of time, just to set expectations accordingly. The response that's kind of come back and forth in email is completely up in the air right now, because that presumes that there is a 1900 that is necessarily here to have a hangar need for. The quote to take off the door came in about double what Jim Gallagher is expecting. He had been told it was gonna be about 4,000. But that $4,000 verbal quote was assuming that a new door was gonna be purchased and that another installation of the door was all gonna happen, and that resulted, but if it's just gonna be a single project of removing the door and not doing the rest of the work, it doubled to $8,000. He's pushing back on that and looking for ways just to strengthen the door, just to get it through the season. Ted's concern is he doesn't want any liability responsibility, and that's part of why he wants out sooner rather than later. So honestly, I don't know where that stands, and until I think public charters, again, has this as a priority. We've got an agreement, it can be modified. I don't think we know enough about the future to be saying, this is what we should do. It may turn out that this need for this winter goes away, in which case Ted says, I don't really wanna do this at all, then. I'll just, use it, and I think it's safe enough for me to drive a truck in and out every once in a while, and, this may all go away. So, that is the status of that item.
On the agreement, there's a double payment there. It's just annual payments out, so just a real ball thing.
Okay.
And I just had a question too on this, what is a garage keeper's lien? I know what a lien is, but what's a garage keeper's lien?
I couldn't answer that. It's legalese that George has mentioned to me in the past about precedents that basically cover you for some of the issues where we've had in the past, like this essentially abandoned aircraft that the owner hadn't been paying rent on. What rights do you have as the owner of a building when someone else has their stuff in it? And that falls under that
I see, that makes sense. Yeah.
topic.
Okay. And then, item 5.2 hasn't been filled in yet, though, this folks, the authority is responsible for the payment of the following utilities and other charges related to T-hanger, and then it's got something -9.
Yep.
And so that's been filled in those?
Yeah, that's just standard language.
Okay.
So.
But I think to answer your question, Mark, it hasn't been filled in yet.
Yeah, it hasn't.
It hasn't, but we know what it is, it's just using a template.
It's to be continued and if and when needed.
So,
there's
Barry,
nothing
it
Ted
sounds
can
like
turn
you're
on, just-
proposing just to let things set for the moment?
I would say that based on the set of circumstances and also the conversation I had with Jim Gallagher this morning, which says this is not his top priority right now. And until it becomes his top priority, we don't have enough information to move forward in one way or another.
Okay. I would say I would agree with what you're saying, Barry. How about the rest of you folks?
Yeah.
Okay. Unanimous then. What's that?
Nothing.
Oh, you got, was it up for sale today? $1,000, you're all set?
Actually, 2 months ago, I'd actually reached out to Jim Gallagher to see if we could start a blanket program for the
Okay.
casino, and then after hearing that, I don't want to do business with him.
Yeah,
I thought he was quite a nice looking business guy the last, when we met him, when he was doing all this stuff before we was doing the bids. So I was kind of impressed with him.
Right now, the 9-seaters are looking pretty good.
Boutique, right. I like their planes, but nobody likes the single engine. Okay, any other comments by authority members here?
I
Go ahead.
apologize for missing the last 2 meetings, but on the October meeting, I was in the air ambulance on the way to Ann Arbor, so
Some things you don't have any control over, Barry.
yeah, I originally got on this commission because I like airplanes. I thought a free perk might come along once in a while. That wasn't the one I got.
Holy smokes, an emergency airplane, what happened?
Well, on October 10th, I had a surgery to take some cancer out of my throat, and when I woke up that morning, it was hemorrhaging, and they couldn't stop it, so they flew me to Ann Arbor.
Wow.
So, but that kind of knocked me for a loop for a while, but I'm recovering now, so. here
That's
I
good.
Yeah.
Now you look good.
And they probably use a little super glue in there. Okay, any other comments?
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you. Okay, meeting adjourned.